This is one of the reasons I have never started a YouTube channel. It's because I don't know how to start a video without being awkward. They're just, hi, hey, hi, it's Hannah. Today I'm going to be doing something that's a little nerve-wracking for me. I am going to hopefully be starting the first of my YouTube channel. I've been reading a lot about living fearlessly and breaking free from anxiety. I've been doing a lot of Bible studies and stuff about it, and that's anxiety is something that I've battled with for a long time, and it's held me back from doing a lot of things that I wanted to do, like starting a YouTube channel. So I am going to take this as my first leap in breaking free from that. So I'm going to start with sharing my pregnancy and birth story. It seems like a perfect place to start because it is something, it seems like something that I can talk about and just share my heart on and share my story. And so there's a whole bunch that I have not necessarily never talked about, but like people have heard bits and pieces of each story, but not like all together. So I'm excited to share it. I need water because I'm stressed. So in June of last year, I found out that I was pregnant, and I was very excited. The first thing I did is call one of my best friends, Hannah, and I was like, I'm pregnant. And it was very exciting, very, very scary, because like while we were happy, it's a little crazy to be, Joel and I had only been married for, Joel and I had only been married for 6 months, and so at this point, marriage was still very new. We're learning the ropes of that, and now we have a baby that's being added into it. So scary, it's exciting, and when I told Joel, he cried. He was so happy, and then we immediately were like, well, okay, what do we do now? We initially set up an OBGYN appointment. That was our original plan, was to go through the hospital. Last year was 2020, so it was obviously lots of COVID and lots of craziness. So right off the bat was like a little, I briefly mentioned Homebirth to Joel, and he was like, no. And not no, you can, but not, more like a no, I don't know that I could feel, kind of saying that he didn't know how he felt about it. He didn't really feel like it was a good idea. So I kind of put it in the back of my mind, and like I did a little bit of research here, a little bit of research there, and then as time went on, the idea of doing a home birth more and more became something I wanted to do, and the more I thought about it. And one thing for my anxiety in particular, if I'm anxious, if I'm hurting, I need to be able to move. I cannot be still. And a lot of times in the hospital, this is how you're birthing, you stick with it. So I wanted the option to be able to move and to freely give birth however I needed to. And I always loved the idea of a water birth because I knew I didn't want to get an epidural. I didn't want pain medication. So having something like water would make things a lot simpler in that aspect. So that's kind of what I was leaning towards. What? But I kind of was like, hey, do you want to go with me to this meeting I set up about home birth? And like at this point, Joel was kind of getting more open to the idea. So I was like, we'll just talk to the midwife. We'll just have a meeting. If we don't want to do it, we don't have to. Let's just talk to her. So by this point, it's mid to late October. And so we have set up an appointment with the midwife, and I'm like, yes. So we go talk to her, we ask lots of questions, and Joel just becomes super on board. Joel was concerned with the COVID thing. He also wanted me to be able to have the birth experience that I wanted. And so it was kind of a no-brainer after that. Even financially, it was a better option. We loved it. We loved the idea of doing a home birth, and so we kind of met with one midwife, and then we contacted her and we were like, okay, we want to switch care to you. We knew that I had been having, not complications, but I started around 14 weeks having very intense migraines. If you've never had a migraine, then you won't understand the severity of it, but I was having visual disturbances. I was unable to see. Sometimes I was having spots go across my eyes, vision blurry, half of my face and my arm and my this whole half of my body would go numb. I could feel the migraines coming on because I would get very disoriented. I wouldn't be trying to say words and I'd say like the wrong word, or I'd mess up the word completely. Like I got very, very disoriented with them, so I could pinpoint when they were happening. And they're happening 1 and 2 every week. So it was a lot of them, pretty intense. Today at my baby shower, I got a migraine and I was doing something. I think I was about to open the gifts and I just looked at my mom and said, "Got to be kidding me. I'm getting a migraine right now." And she's like, "What?" And I was like, "I'm getting a migraine. I can feel it. Like, I can tell." Because my hands started to feel weird. So I could tell that I was getting a migraine. Just very frustrating. And so I go to start opening my gifts and then I start losing my vision. I'm like, "Listen, y'all, I cannot see what these cards say. I can't see what the gifts are. So I'm just going to have my mom describe them to me. If I seem ungrateful, sorry, I literally cannot see." So I was just like blind from like here down. It was a little bit overwhelming, but it wasn't anything that they were too concerned about because, you know, all of my tests were coming back normal. They were checking my blood. My thyroid had regulated itself out because I struggle with hypothyroidism. So I was on medication for that. If you can see Jude's little feet. So everything had kind of been okay. I had been good health-wise other than the migraines. So that's like my pregnancy. I didn't really have like anything too intense. I was extremely exhausted. And then the migraines were very much not a positive experience. But it wasn't bad. I mean, in terms of things, it could have been worse, I guess, to say. The migraines were not the worst thing that I could have experienced. But I was extremely exhausted. And then the first trimester, I had very bad nausea. So about a month before his due date, I started itching like random places on my body. And if you've ever been pregnant, you know that one of the things they tell you is if you itch, you need to let your doctor know. You need to call them or whatever. So I mentioned it at my appointment, but it wasn't like intense enough. And so at this point, a month out from your due date, or maybe it's 3 weeks. Either way, one of those two, you have a home visit at your house and they make sure that you've got space to give birth in your home, making sure your home is not necessarily like clean enough, but like if your house is too messy, obviously it's difficult. They go through your house with you and they're like, "Okay, you want to put the pool in here." So we put the pool in Jude's room. And then like, okay, if we go to the bedroom, we need to make sure we know where you want to be in the bedroom. And then if you have a bigger house, we have a very small house, so it wasn't that big an issue, but like, where's the kitchen? Where's the bathroom? Where's the bathtub? So do you have this, this, and this? Like, went through the list of things that we would need. And like, how our house should be set up. And it was very helpful. And it helped me feel more prepared for giving birth at my house. But at this home visit, I kind of mentioned, "Hey, I'm itching a little bit." They put it in my notes. It wasn't anything that serious because nothing else had alarmed with it. There was no other symptoms that had alarmed with it. Because even the migraines, which a headache is kind of a symptom of other issues, I've always had headaches. What are you doing? I've always had headaches and I've always had migraines. So it wasn't like I was like all of a sudden getting these headaches and migraines and it was out of the blue and like crazy, but I've always had them. So it was just kind of like intensifying hormonal migraines. And even my OBGYN, she was not concerned about them. So I was at work one day and I had been itching all through the night and it was so bad. It was all over my feet, my armpits, my sides, my face was itching, my arms were itching. It was so bad. I texted my midwife that night and then the next morning I was at work and she texted me, she's like, "Well, why don't you just come down here real fast, we'll get some blood work." And then, so I went down, got some blood work taken, back to work. And the next morning, while I was at work, I get a call from my midwife. She was just kind of explaining to me that my liver levels were elevated, and like that's cause for concern because of cholestasis. I don't know if I say that word right. So obviously that's very scary, and nobody really wants to hear that one of your organs is not functioning properly, especially such an important organ when you're pregnant. Especially when you're about to deliver. It's very scary and it's very overwhelming. So I kind of freaked out, and then we had to do more tests because of that. So we did fasting, blood work, and everything. And I ended up, actually, my work was awesome. They were like, "Go ahead and start your maternity leave," which was amazing. I really appreciated them just saying, like, "Go ahead, go home, not a big deal." So they were very, very, I'm very grateful that they allowed me to go home. My family came in the like first week of February because like they wanted to be there for me because we kind of thought that I might be going into labor soon because we just like I was already having contractions and everything, and so we kind of just thought that I would soon. And then we tried to do all the things that get a baby out, but if a baby's not ready to be born, it's not going to be born. So while they were here, we actually got one of the biggest snowstorms that literally I've ever been in. The roads were frozen. Everyone's like locked in their house. It was like very intense. Our heating bill was insane that month because it just couldn't keep up. A lot of people were without power. And then we ended up under a boil advisory. And my thought was, oh my gosh, I want to have a water birth. So how is that supposed to work? When this ice hit, on that Monday, I started having very strong contractions on Monday the 15th. So much so that I texted my midwife and I was like, hey, I'm having extremely strong contractions and I think that I'm in labor. And I had already had some of the other signs that you're going into labor. If you've ever been pregnant, you know what I'm talking about. My water had not broken. But I had some other signs of labor. And so I called Joel. Joel was at work. I was like, hey, I think you need to come home because I think I'm in labor. And they were very strong contractions. They were pretty close together. But my midwife was like, lay down, try resting, see if the contractions stop. If they stop, then it's fine, and then we'll just go from there. Then time goes on, and they stop. So I was like, okay, back to square one. And then at this point, it was snowing, but we weren't iced in yet. And then a couple days later, we were obviously iced in. So I'm texting my midwife. I'm like, what happens if I go into labor now? And so like basically I'm having to pray that now I don't go into labor. I've been praying that I go into labor because I you know, when you're being told something's wrong with your health, that could compromise your baby's health. If it goes on too long, if it intensifies, you're like, I just want my baby to be born. You're scared and you just want to hold your baby. And so I really had a hard time with the fact that now I've been praying, God, please let this baby be born. Now I had to be like, God, please don't let this baby be born. Please let him just hold off. And without having monitoring, without having like them listening to make sure he's okay, I was scared because like if he slows down in movement even just a little bit, I was like, oh my gosh, like, is he okay? Because you don't see the baby. Like, now that I can see him, it's like, okay, I can visibly tell you whether he's okay or not. I think he's okay. But when he was in my belly, you know, it's a little harder to be able to tell. Where are you going? It worked out the way it was supposed to. Babies are born when they want to be born. They do not care about your timeline. They're just chilling in the womb. The 19th was his due date, and that was one of the days I was having to say, dear Lord, please don't let him be born today. And I was like, I really didn't want to go past due, but my midwife was literally, she lives on a hill, so she was frozen up in her house. She's like, I cannot get to you. So if you go into labor, you're going to have to call an ambulance. By the 20th, it starts to look like it's melting very fast by the 19th and 20th. And at this point, my parents have been at my house for like a week and a half, 2 weeks. And so they're like, well, we think we're going to go home. Are you okay with that? And I was like, well, yeah, but as soon as y'all leave, you know, I'm going to go into labor. So basically that's what happened. The day of the 21st, I was speaking with my midwife, and I was like, I really kind of just wanted to be born. Like, I'm ready for him to be born, and we talked about natural induction method. So we discussed the Foley bulb, which is like, it would have just been like a saline solution that they inflate, and it causes your cervix to open and for you to dilate. So we talked about that. We said that if I hadn't like started labor by the next morning, Monday, they were going to do blood work, and then they were going to do the Foley bulb. When I told my mom that they were going to do the Foley bulb the next day, because my midwife had come to the house, or sent one of her assistants to the house on Saturday, and they did like some shaking for the baby and like moved. If you've ever seen, I can't think of what they're called. Rebozo. It's like a technique where reposition the baby, or they can lift the baby, just different things to make labor less uncomfortable and also help with positioning the baby to be born. I kept having contractions. I kept having, like the whole week I was having contractions. I kept thinking, okay, I'm going into labor. And obviously I didn't. So they were like, okay, so let's try to reposition him. So she came over, repositioned him, did some stuff, gave me the mile circuit to do. Different things like that, and then we were just gonna kind of wait it out. So then Sunday we talked about doing the Foley bulb, and then Sunday night my mom got here, picked her up from the airport, and then I wanted tops because that was one of the biggest things I'd been craving throughout my whole pregnancy was tops. So I picked up Tops barbecue, and on the way I was like, man, these contractions are hurting a little more. Like this feels more like Monday. And they were like pretty close together, but I was like, they weren't too bad. I was able to go to sleep that night. So I ate my food, and then I went and got in bed, watched some TikToks, and then fell asleep. I woke up the next morning for my appointment. Joel went with me to this appointment, and we're like on the way, and I'm like, man, these contractions are hurting. Like I'm in a little bit of pain. And they were pretty close together. And like I didn't want to say anything to my midwife until I knew, because I didn't want to seem like the boy who cried wolf 100 times. So I didn't say anything about the intensity of my contractions. I'm like literally sitting in her office. I'm like doing like this, like trying to cope through the contractions. And she's like, all right, well, how you feeling? I'm like, oh, I'm having a little bit of contractions, blah, blah, blah. We're just kind of talking through them. She's like, are you comfortable with, and something I loved about midwife care is they don't just say, we're going to do a membrane sweep, or we're going to break your water, or we're going to do this or that. It's, do you want? What are you thinking? And they fully explain everything. And that's something I loved about working with a midwife, is I felt like I understood the birth process so much better. I really liked that the midwife shared helpful information without me feeling like I'm stupid for not knowing. She asked me, like, do you want to do a membrane sweep? I would recommend doing a membrane sweep before we do the Foley bulb, because if the Foley bulb, it only dilates you up to 3 centimeters. So basically, once that happens, it will fall out. She checked, and she's like, well, actually, I cannot do the Foley bulb. And you have to be even a little bit, just a little bit dilated, I think, to a 1 to be able to use. So basically, I'm there for an induction, and she's like, I can't do it. And I'm like really upset. I'm like, I'm having these intense contractions, and I'm not dilated at all. And she was like, you're already 3 centimeters dilated and 60% effaced. And I was like, oh. So she's like, I'm going to do like a slight membrane sweep. Then it was time for me to go home. So I got in the car, and I was like, we're going to have a baby today. And it was really exciting because this was like 8 a.m. So I had been having contractions since about 7 the night before, and it's now 8 a.m. the next day. And I'm having pretty strong contractions, and like they amped up in the car. And I was like, Nash, lay down, dude. They amped up a lot in the car. They got kind of intense. And I was like, these are very close together. So we get the pull from the midwife. We bring it here. And we are still under a boil advisory, mind you. So that was a lot to figure out what we were going to do with that. So we've been boiling water for a couple weeks and storing it so that we could have water ready. But now we've got to heat this water and then try to fill up the tub. So we blow up the tub. We don't put water in it until we know that I'm getting closer to labor. So it's about 10 a.m. Joel's like, go take a nap. Me and your mom will do stuff. And I'm like, okay. So I go lay down and I watch TikToks, and he comes over. He's like, you're supposed to be taking a nap. I'm like, I'm too excited. I cannot sleep. So I do not nap. But I tried multiple times throughout the day. I just couldn't. I was excited. It wasn't the pain. I was just excited. I just wanted to meet my baby. And so I woke up and I came out, and the living room was clean. And they're like, we need to go to Walmart. Do you want to go with us? I was like, I honestly don't think I can handle walking around Walmart. And so they got me Chick-fil-A because I wanted Chick-fil-A. And that was your last meal in the womb. I'm sitting on my birth ball at my computer, and I'm like editing, doing some work from home on the computer, and I'm like, oh my gosh, I hurt so bad. And I'm like bouncing on the bouncing ball, and then eventually I'm like, I cannot do this anymore. I cannot focus. Then my midwife came over around 4 or 5, I want to say, and my assistant midwife, because I had a student midwife who assisted with the delivery. And so, you looking at yourself? You see yourself? So she was at the house, and she's like trying to help me through some things, checking my vitals, listening to baby, all that stuff. And so she was like, well, why don't you go like walk around the house and do this and do that, and like giving suggestions of things to do. So there's like a video of me and Joel like walking up and down on the fireplace, doing some like steppers. And then, like, Joel played guitar for me. I bounced on the ball. We walked around the neighborhood a ton of times in the dark, in the cold. At this point, my contractions were pretty close together. They were hurting pretty good, but, like, there wasn't any sign of me being, like, giving birth, because I was able to talk through them. I was able to breathe through them, move through them. But no signs of, like, popping a baby out anytime soon. My midwife decided she's going to go. She's like, go take a nap or go to bed, because it's, like, 8:30, 9 o'clock at this point. And so she's like, go to bed, go rest, and get some sleep, and call me if anything changes. So she leaves. The office is like 30 minutes away, but she lives about 3 hours away, and so she went home, and or she didn't go home, she just went to the office. And so I'm like trying to go to bed, and I'm like, ugh. I'm like complaining the entire time. Joel's like sleeping next to me, and he's like, I know he's like, shut up, because I'm like, oh my gosh, I hurt. Oh my gosh, I hurt. And I'm like flipping over, tossing, turning. I cannot stop rolling. Like, I am hurting. And then I'm hurting so bad, and I'm like, I cannot stand to lay here anymore. So I get up and I go to the living room, and like I'm on the birth ball, and Joel comes out, and my mom's sleeping in the living room, and I'm hunched over on the birth ball, and Joel's like, what's wrong? What are you feeling? I'm like, I literally, like, this is gross, but I feel like I have to poop. And Joel's like, we need to call the midwife. And I'm like, well, I don't want to be dramatic. He's like, we're calling the midwife. So he called the midwife, and he's explained all the stuff I'm feeling. He's like, she hasn't slept the entire time. She's just been complaining about being in pain, and like she tried sleeping but she couldn't. And so I'm kind of like hunched over on the birth ball, and then they show up, and we text my family and say, hey, Hannah's going into labor. So my dad's 6 hours away, so he starts driving. My older sister's 6 hours away, so she starts driving. I think my dad slept a little bit and then got on the road, but then my sister immediately, her and my niece got on the road, and they got over here. We told Joel's mom I was in labor. So I'm like hunched over this birth ball, and everyone's like doing stuff around me. Joel's like being really supportive, and then my midwife shows up, and so she starts like helping with like coping methods, like counter pressure, different things like that. So that was one thing that really helped, was the pressure on my hips and my back. Counter pressure was very helpful, and hip squeezes were very helpful. And so I labored around a little bit. And then, actually, one thing she told me, which was very weird, and like to me, was to go sit on the toilet and just like chill there, because for some reason on the toilet, like a lot of people's labor progresses. Something about the way you sit. So I sat on the toilet, and I was sitting there, and I was just like, oh, I do not want to be in here. Like, this is awkward. And Joel's like sitting across from me, and I'm like, this is the most awkward experience of my life. And all of a sudden, like, I feel something, and I'm like, what was that? And Joel's like, how am I supposed to know what that was? And I was like, I think my water just broke, because my water had not broken at that point. So I went to the Joel left the bathroom and was like, hey, Hannah thinks her water just broke. And then they came back, and they're like, if you think it did, it probably did. I was like, it definitely felt like a pop, and then like water. So I was pretty positive that my water had broken. And then they were like, well, you can get in the pool now as soon as they finish getting ready. So they're, again, having to boil this water and dump it in the pool for me. Like, I really appreciate my family doing that. My mom had been doing that all day, and then Joel started helping her. but when I was actively in labor, I needed her in there with, or Joel in there with me, so he obviously wasn't doing that. But they're putting water in the pool, and I was really, really wanting to be able to labor in the pool. I wasn't like, no matter what, I want him born in the pool, but I really wanted to labor in the pool. So I'm laboring in the pool. Hi, I'm talking about you. I'm laboring in the pool. It's hurting. I'm getting this cramp in like my back and my legs because like your whole lower body is like feeling intense pain. Honestly, breathing through the contractions, being able to move and like adjust sides throughout the contractions like really helped. I kept saying, I can't do this. I can't do this. I don't think I can do this. And Joel's like, you are doing it. Like he wasn't being ugly, but he was like, you can do it because you are doing it. And like it wasn't like I was like, I can't do this without medicine. I just was like, truly, when that's happening, you're like, oh my gosh, I cannot give birth. Like, this is so intense. And it wasn't even like how painful it was. It was just the intensity. Like, the whole experience was intense. You're being flooded with hormones, and like, it's just so much intensity. So I'd been in there for a while, and they were like, I think we want to get you out, let you like rest for a minute, and then we'll have you get back in if you're feeling up to it. So they try to help me out, and like I have a contraction in the middle of getting out of the water, so I like have to hold on to the side of Joel and just like breathe through the contraction. And then they try to help me out of the pool, and like I realized that I really cannot control my legs. Like, I don't have a whole lot of control over my legs. They're really weak and shaky. And so like I'm trying to walk down the hallway and I about fall. Like, I'm in so much pain in this one leg, and it's like really numb and just uncomfortable. And like Nash is like checking on me, and he's worried about me. So they like get me to the bed, and then like we're just gonna check to see where you're at. And they were like, okay, we can feel his head. Like you could see the top of his head crowning. And so they're like, okay, this in these next couple pushes, like he's gonna be born. So that was about 5 when I got out of the pool and I went to get in the bed. And so at about 5, go make the transition from in here to our bedroom, and we're in our bed. And I'm like on my back at first, and she's like, let me have you stand up. So I put my arms around my midwife, or maybe it's around Joel. I think it was around Joel. So I have my arms around Joel, and I'm like pushing, laboring, and she's like, as you're laboring and you're going through a contraction, sit down into it. But my legs were so physically weak that I could not labor like that. It was, or like push like that. It was really hurting me. What are you looking at? It was really hurting me to push like that. So, because of my legs were so stinking weak. So I was like, I can't do this anymore. I need to sit down. So they have me lay back on my bed, and like I'm having to push through these contractions, and like, so I go from the water to the room, and he's already crowning. Like, you can already see the top of his head. I could feel the top of his head. So I'm laying there, and they have me push on my back. The student midwife is here, Joel's here, and then to catch him was the primary midwife. And so I pushed for, I think he was born at 5:30. So from the water to the bedroom is about 30 minutes-ish. Maybe a little more, because it might not have been exactly 5, but it was about 5. So I push, and he comes out, and he's not breathing quite right. And I forget this part every single time I tell the story, but when I was laboring there at the end, his heart rate started dropping, and my blood pressure was low, so they gave me some oxygen, and so they really wanted to get him out. So when he came out, he wasn't breathing, and I was worried because he was purple. I know all babies are born purple, but when you see your baby being purple, it's a little nerve-wracking. So he came out, and he's purple, and he wasn't breathing quite right, so she had to give him a little bit of baby CPR, and I'm still on oxygen at this point. Like, I had to have oxygen the entire time like the entire end of my labor. And then he was born, and then he got to be put on my chest, and it was so special and so amazing. And then Joel got to cut the cord, and I got to do delayed cord clamping like I wanted to, which is awesome. It was overall an amazing experience. I had a little difficulty with breastfeeding. Thankfully, my older sister is very knowledgeable, and she was able to help me with breastfeeding and with figuring that out, because I don't know what I would have done. He didn't latch at first, and so we had to figure that out. I figured out the best way to hold him and everything, and my sister stayed at my house and helped me a lot. And it was just it was a great experience, and I would do a home birth again. Obviously everything didn't go perfect. I didn't get to give birth in a pool like I wanted to, but I gave birth to a healthy, happy baby. And if anyone's ever considering home birth, I would 100% recommend it, because it was a great experience for me. And even Joel said, I cannot imagine you ever giving birth in a hospital. So every kid that I have from here on out, as long as health-wise it's permitted, I will be delivering at home, because I had such a great experience. I really, really loved getting to just be in my own home, be in a comfortable environment, and then like being able to sleep in my own bed was nice. I did end up having to go to the hospital a week later. We thought it was an infection from labor, but it was actually mastitis, which is very common with when your milk starts coming in. It's a clogged duct. It's very uncomfortable. You feel like you've got the flu, or like you're dying, you're running a fever. And honestly, that was kind of worse than labor for me, because I'm like sweating, I'm burning up, and then I get cold, and like it was a really high fever. And then you got a baby trying to nurse who like relies on you for food. So you've got this baby who relies on you for food, and you're trying to nurse him, but you are like dying. But all in all, it was a really positive experience, and I would do it again. It really helped me with being able to cope with my anxiety and overcoming like the fear of birth. Hey, don't talk to them like that. So it was really a great experience. I would do it again, and I'm so thankful to have the opportunity, because I know not everybody does have the opportunity to do a home birth. But if you do and you're interested, I am happy to answer questions. I had a... Hey. Born 8 pounds, 8 ounces, and he was 22 inches long. On February 23rd at 5:30 a.m. And we're so blessed and so thankful to be able to have this experience and have a healthy baby. So yeah, that's my birth story. I probably forgot some stuff, but that is the gist and the highlights. So yeah, bye-bye. It's time for me to take a nappy.